Welcome to Gym City Comic Con, dude. This is amazing. Look at where I'm at. Check this out. We got over thousands of comic books and 1,000 comic lovers from all over the world. Checking out Gym City Comic Con 2014. Oh yeah. Did you see the smile on my face? Oh yeah. So I forgot that there's going to be some activities. So follow along with me as we enjoy these activities. Check it out. Oh yeah. That's awesome. Fascinating. We're doing a tournament, so that's good fun. I wish it was funny when I can do all these activities. There's too much to do. Alright. I'm shooting somebody right now. He's in the forest. And boom! Oh. They're shooting. Okay, let's see what we're for here. We got a lot of classic comics. There's the dummy up there. Oh yeah. Look at all the Marvel.
Looks like
X-Men. I have no idea. If I wanted to buy some, I have no idea what I would buy. There's so many to choose from. There's another X-Men. This is 30 cents. And October. Hey, what's in here? This is amazing. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. They have their own comics. This might be interesting. Alright. How much does this cost?
You want that one?
Yeah, how much does it cost?
It's $30.
30 bucks?
Yeah, $30.
Wow. I'll have to pass. I thought it'd be cheaper than that. Alright.
Alright.
Yeah, I'll pass. Whoa. $30. Okay, there's some more stuff over here.
The more that we have our network up and running and are connected to one another, the more we can leverage our individual accomplishments to then make it possible for us as individuals to go into classrooms in our institutions and make these kind of differences. So it's a sound call and a necessary one.
Join the cause.
And it's part of the reason that Randy Duncan and I went about the business of writing The Power of Comics. And this isn't an ad for that book, but I just want to tell you what the book is. It's a textbook for the basic comic studies class. The idea is to create for people as a reference a tool that will allow them to understand, as the subtitle suggests, the history, the form, and the culture surrounding comics, and to have a one-stop opportunity to find places where you can get information on how to critically read comics, how to study the culture like gender issues within comics, how to understand the culture that evolved through comics in terms of fandom, how to find the history of comics. Lord knows there are 5,000 histories of comic books out there. I think I read 4,000 of them when we were doing this book. But you know, they're all sort of scattered about. Where could you get everything in one spot? So Power of Comics is really trying to do that, to give people a sense of where things are. And I'm pleased to report it's actually going into a second edition this year. So we've made some modifications and some revisions. There's a really kick-butt profile of Trina Robbins in this edition.
Very nice.
I'm just saying it because I wrote it. No, it's because it's Trina. I mean, that's the cool thing. Trina is just amazing. If you missed her presentation in the earlier hour, do not miss meeting her on the floor. She is a legend in comics, and you would do yourself a favor to stop by and visit her down in the Artist Alley. But Mark Wade was gracious enough to step up and write the introduction for this edition, and we took on our introduction writer from the last edition, Paul Levitz, and he is now a co-author with us on this edition. So Paul's been deeply involved in rewriting, contributing 2 new chapters that are in this book. So it's going to be a very dynamic, much more refined focus on the industry, on the medium, on the art form, and I hope you'll check it out when it comes out later this year. But part of our mission, Randy and I have had since we got together 8 years ago, has really been about sort of broadening people's understanding of comics by taking all the marvelous work that our colleagues in comic studies have done, pulling it together and then representing it to people, really giving that a sort of focus where people can get together and understand things. So Jeff asked me to talk about some key concepts that are found within the power of comics, and I hope you'll go there, convince a librarian to buy a copy for you so you don't have to spend your own money. Get it through OhioLink. Who in here is connected to OhioLink? Several of you. There's dozens of copies out there. You can get a copy. The notion that any singular story is itself related to other stories, either within that serial or within a larger universe of a narrative framework. So, the first comic to really do this in any kind of bold, ostentatious way came from Gardner Fox back in 1940, when he took the disparate characters that were being published across 2 lines of comics, the American and the National, and basically put the characters in one magazine and said, hey, these characters actually know one another. They inhabit the same shared space, and they can interact with each other. And that notion was moderately popular, but it didn't really dig in the way it would in the 1960s. And Stanley and Jack Kirby really sort of figured out how to capitalize on this notion in the pages of early Marvel Comics. And as you can see from the cover of Amazing Spider-Man #1, they weren't shy about it. Right? Putting characters in the same universe allowed them then to have that opportunity for interaction and to understand that one relates to the other, relates to another. This isn't a concept that comics developed, right? Because even Charles Dickens was having characters cross over from one series to another, so it's not entirely an innovation of comics, but it's beautifully demonstrated through comics.
Oh yeah, Young City Comics Town. These are retro comics. Over here. And we got some James Bond.
On the card set, you buy one, the second one's 50% off on all the cards.
Oh, okay, that's a good deal. Cards, alright. Well, Superman, Wonder Woman, like a toy. I just got a Kevin Eastman meet and greet tonight only. I think I'm going to be sending that. I think it's like around 4 o'clock, so check that out. Injustice, alright. Now this is the greatest comic book of all time. Injustice. It's up there actually, I'm not really kidding. Injustice, there's Gods Among Us, Superman, and whoever that bald guy is behind him, and those weird things. So that's good. Oh, it's from the creators of Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat! Right.
Oh god, it's terrifying.
Oh boy, that was Deadpool. I wonder who would win in a fight, Raphael or Deadpool. I guess we'll... Raphael or Deadpool, who would win in a fight? I think we'll never know. That's a fantasy match. Warning, adult only, look at your own risk. I guess I'll always blurt this out on YouTube. Look at your own risk. Please, Lord. Okay, I've seen enough. Ooh, Superman, hey. Alright, that's a really cool line. Amazing. Alright, let's look basketball right there. Alright.
My wife does. Playhouse. Oh.
Now, don't fool the baby up in the field now.
You can even do a scat.
Who is it?
You can even do a scat.
No, that's not Donatello. That's the best ever.
Yes, you're the best ever.
Raphael is the best ever.
Yes, Raphael's the best turtle. This is awesome. Alright.
Oh, dirty. Miss Carson. Dirty. What's going on around here?
I can tell you, Billy Graham's gonna like this. The snow guy.
What's up, man?
Alright.
Dude, thank you.
If you read this comic book, you will go to hell. It's called No Guys. Alright.
My name is Christopher Kaus. I'm actually the president of the Comic Book League. I started it in, October, technically, of last year. We've been on campus for about 2 semesters. Our focus is basically not just to talk about comic books directly, but to actually try to teach with them.
Hi, I'm Doc Wells. I'm the vice president of the Comic League. Don't really have a statement prepared for this, so...
You're an action figure.
Yeah, I'm an action figure enthusiast. Basically, I was here 10 minutes before I had spent my entire con fund.
I'm Alexander Kincaid. I like comic books. I've grown up watching tons of Saturday morning cartoons that were all based on comic books, and then after a while I ended up getting into the whole comic book community, I guess. So, yeah.
I'm Dustin Carson. I'm not a member of the league. They were kind enough to ask me to.
Member.
I'm honorary.
Yay.
I'm a small press creator. I'm so nerd that I actually create my own comic books and try and sell them.
So, my name is Victor Dandridge. I'm a small press comic creator as well from Columbus, Ohio. You guys might know me as the 8-bit guy. I have the 8-bit stuff. I apparently get to be a reserve member of the Comic League here, which is awesome. Yeah, reserve member.
Secretary of Comic Book League, and my name is Kathy Rodabaugh. Just got married, sorry, 6 months ago. So, to this lovely gentleman over here in the great coffee.
Stand up there.
What is the significance of the secret identity, and how would you compare that idea with how it is used in comics from then to now? You can start with Chris over here.
Of course. My friend actually gave me this question because I put up a thing online for people to donate their questions and stuff. This one is actually interesting because I had him ask me about the secret identity and how many characters I could actually name that still have a secret identity persona nowadays. And honestly, I couldn't really come up with more than maybe 2 or 3 on the spot because I was thinking you've got Superman with Clark Kent, and I think that was actually the only one I could come up with, just because it seems that most of the characters have changed now over the years to the point where it's no longer necessary, whereas in the past it seemed to be like the cool thing to do. But it seems like if you look at most of the characters, they've either come out, like especially with Peter Parker being, they retconned it, right?
Brandy Day.
Yeah, so, but the fact that it was printed, I think, that's interesting. Like, how many characters, do have a secret identity. Yeah, so from then, I think it was something that was actually necessary back in the days, and I think that's what worked for the time, but now it's just so, it feels like unreasonable to think that in real life that there could be a person that could go that long without a secret identity, or to still maintain a secret identity. I think maybe Batman with Bruce Wayne would be another one, but it feels like he's become so close to giving away his identity. It's not going to be like that for very long. So,
I mean, to go off that, I mean, Bruce Wayne is basically, he's no longer like really Bruce Wayne anymore. He's more or less Batman all the time, and then Bruce Wayne is his secret identity. Yeah. If anyone picks that up, I mean, so I just to interject.
No, it's good.
Well, and the solid amount of people who know who Bruce Wayne is now.
Yeah, and
I'm going to ask this gentleman in the suit to share a question.
Well, I was thinking, wouldn't it be more that we live in such a social media time where everyone is always sharing everything, that the idea of a secret identity is almost silly because so much of a single person is public anyways? It'd seem even harder nowadays to be able to say this person has this secret.
That's a good connection.
Say it's the opposite of that. If you think about at least in the first advent of social media and online forums, how many of us used our actual names as opposed to some sort of identifier, email address name, or some sort of screen name, which would then make our actual identities secret? There are a lot of people that operate on the internet, especially with anonymity, and will say things or do things using that anonymity, and it is a way of having a secret identity because they don't feel like anybody could trace it back to them. That's a big thing that we have, especially with bullying, things like that. People are using, this secret identity-esque tactic of, I can say whatever in this realm because I'm not really, you don't really know it's me, I don't really know it's you. So there's different ways that I think it's used or being used now, but in that modern sense, I think social media actually makes us do it more often than less often. Despite the fact that we are sharing more of ourselves, we're hiding who we are in many, many ways.
Being anonymous will actually, you take away responsibility for your actions.
Right.
Whereas, like with a superhero, where if they were doing these things as a vigilante, you've got, like characters that are basically being persecuted because they're not holding up their responsibility of what they're actually doing. If you had Bruce Wayne actually out there fighting crime, it would be more political.
Right.
Then I think it would be actually, where it would be more he's being chased by everybody because.
And when you go comic book wise with Peter, especially if you watch the newest Amazing Spider-Man, who he is as Spider-Man is antagonistic. He's very antagonistic as Spider-Man. He'll make fun of you. He'll make jokes about the things that he's doing to you. Peter Parker would never do that. Peter is a wallflower. He's very, quiet and insecure. But with the anonymity that Spider-Man carries, Peter can say whatever he wants to you, and you can't really get back at Peter for it. So if you ever notice, there's a difference of personality almost between who Peter is and who Spider-Man is.
Elaborate on that point, Spider-Man has also said a number of times the reason he does the wisecracks and whips is because he's so scared out of his mind. This is his only way that he can focus himself.
Right.
Yeah, I think that secret identity, and it's two prongs in that. The first thing is obvious, the anonymity. When you put on a mask and you wear a costume, you can be someone different.
Right.
You can do things you wouldn't normally do. But secondly, you got to remember when these characters first came out, nobody knew who they were.
Yeah.
Are you going to identify with Superman? No, you're going to identify with the human aspect, that human sympathy, so that you start to care about Clark Kent as a human. You can't connect with Superman as a god if you don't know who Clark Kent is. But in today's world, we already know the story.
Right.
The secret identity is kind of pointless in that.
Yeah.
It's been done and done and done and done. We already know Spider-Man is Peter Parker. He can be Peter Parker inside the mask now. Now he can be. Because we already know the characters. But in their origination, nobody knew who these characters were. You had to have that human
my
connection.
Favorite thing to do. Like, before girls were on my radar, before I had money for video games, before comics, before anything, I remember waking up Saturday morning, excited to go watch cartoons. And one of them, because it's around that time, it was around 2003, was when the earliest I can remember. And that was when the start of TMNT, the 2003 series started, which was an amazing cartoon series for me.
When you say 2003, that's when you started watching cartoons?
That was third grade.
You're old.
2003, man. I don't want this guy.
That's as far back as I can remember. Is around 2003.
When were you born?
94.
There's
bits and pieces, but I can consistently I can remember things from around 2002.
I can remember a little more.
Even my book fell over. That's how bad that is. I think my book is older than you. That's bad.
But that's how it is. I loved watching cartoons, and so TMNT was a big thing. Sonic and a bunch of other mainstream cartoons. But I remember Batman. I would watch Batman. I don't remember what series it was, but it was around that time.
The animated series.
It'd be the animated series.
Yeah. Okay. And then TMNT was a huge one, and basically from there, watching those cartoons growing up, I knew the characters, but I didn't read the actual first. I didn't. Someone could have said, "Hey, those are in a book that look." It's you read them, but it's not words; it's pictures. So, around 2005, I read my first comic book. It was Daredevil, but then I got into more broader stuff and found out more about Spider-Man, more about Batman, more about Superman. So I think cartoons are huge for this industry. It definitely brings a lot of people. I mean, you go to Toys R Us and there's like tons of toys that are.
You go downstairs.
You could go to this guy
Well,
because of these animated series. TMNT has a new animated series on Nickelodeon. There's a ton of toys there. You could get. They have their own comic book too that they made an adaptation to. So.
I also think not just the cartoons back then, but the movies now have definitely helped the comic industry in a lot of ways, especially the Marvel movies with how well they're doing.
We're gonna go see Captain America.
Yeah,
too.
but oddly, here's the strange thing though. Obviously, the movies super successful. They're really bringing people to shows, but all the comics, but not to comic shops, man. All the owners I've talked to, I've asked them, you know, have you seen an increase in sales with the explosion of the movies? And all of them,
You know what? Now I will jump on to why that is. And here's the biggest thing. As much as these properties are tied to comic book ideas, you never see any direct correlation between the two. You can go to a toy store and you can have the understanding of a toy from a cartoon. But there is nothing that says that these figures, these properties started off in comics and that that's where you can find their stories. We have a thing called the Comic Shop Locator. Have any of you guys ever heard of this? Yeah. Why is that not at the end of every Walking Dead episode, at the end of every Marvel movie? That should be a big plug. Boom, find a comic shop. But they don't tell you that. It's this understanding of where it is, and they just kind of leave it in the ether. They're more concerned with the merchandising rights that they can get off of toys, lunchboxes, T-shirts, things like that. But they don't push back to the source material.
Yeah. Obviously, they've changed because of the colors on their things.
Spider-Man, I felt, was actually, looking back on all those cartoons now, like especially the X-Men, they were very close to the comic adaptations, but they were very violent. I felt that they were much more mature than what we're getting today, which kind of makes me sad.
Yeah.
I feel like kids are missing out on something.
You look at the
we're getting all these
original
weird
Teen Titans cartoon versus Teen Titans Go.
I love the old.
We don't talk about new ones. Hurts my feelings, man. I watch it and I feel like my brain levels are dropping like 2% every time.
Right with you. Got some comic book workshops coming up next weekend at Rosewood Art Center over in Kettering.
Okay.
And our guest instructors are actually here at the convention today as well.
All right. Well, cool. Thank you. All right. So there's like an extension of this Comic-Con on April 3rd. I'm too. You got the Incredible Hulk woman. All right. Okay. All right.
Appreciate you taking
the time. That's awesome. Ooh, video games. Good. So we got more comic books. I can't believe it. It's the top of the day. Captain America. America. So yeah, that's America. We got Batman and Raphael. Who would have thunk it? Awesome. Hello, I'm a dead man. What type of beverages does Raphael drink? I wonder. So we got Pepsi. Hey, do you have pizza?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Good. Pizza. What type of Comic-Con doesn't have pizza for a turtle? Oh boy. More turtles. And we got My Little Pony. That's a dream team right there. The Ninja Turtles and My Little Pony. So,
I'm sorry, I got signed.
Reggie Monday. And Sean Martin, Heather Legend. And then alright, great. So this is where the legends are when they hit the legends of Comics into Comic-Con. They're at these tables right here. Now I know that, and I like it. So card doing original work for her fans. Awesome. And Steve Scott. There you are. Hello.
Excuse me? I'm not hearing you, kid. I'm sorry. I'm hearing you, but I'm not understanding.
I think $1.
Mr. Watson. All right. Oh, hello.
Batman was really solid in the 80s. You know, 89, that first Batman movie, which I do say, as influential as Batman the Animated Series is, it needed that first Tim Burton Batman. It has the same music, you know, it has the same feel. All of that stuff was from that movie. But in the 80s, we were very affluent. You know, it was the decade of laissez-faire, like whatever. You know, we can do whatever you want to do. In that time, you know, span, we had the crappy Superman movies. Why? Because we didn't have to deal with, you know, being saved. You know, the 70s were over, so we didn't need to be saved. We were in the highlight of the 80s. So I think that there's more of a social aspect to that question that will really come into play of, you know, basically how well is the country itself doing that will determine that answer.
I think you can go back to every generation.
I think so, yeah.
I really do. Depending on the socioeconomic climate will determine what books sell and what books
How do you
don't.
feel about the death of characters in comics? What effects should characters' deaths and resurrections have on that story's universe?
Yeah,
We
please.
can start with an audience member.
go ahead.
Change it up.
I feel like Jason Todd is, as you can see, is a good example for a couple reasons. He was voted to die, but they brought him back, and I feel like he's one of the Marvel's
Comic book death is becoming as cliche as a bullet bouncing off the chest.
Right.
And it's almost expected now.
There's
I mean, that's what it's
There's
coming
an X-Men quote where Jean dies and somebody's explaining to somebody else that Jean was dead, and they stop and they're like, that's not going to last long.
Right.
I think we all know that their deaths aren't final anymore. I think.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm going to make a very controversial statement here. I liked when Bruce Wayne died and Dick Grayson became Batman.
Yes.
Yes.
Because
I'm fine with that. I was fine with
because
the proof.
the thing is, I really wish he had just stayed dead. And in the original drafts of Final Crisis, he is dead.
You could also talk about Spider-Man. You were around for that too.
Or Superman.
For the sake of time, we'll keep it at
But the thing is, when Batman died, it opened the door to let someone else take up the mantle. And I won't say that he is a better Batman. I will say that Dick Grayson is a better superhero than Bruce.
Yeah.
Because Bruce is not a public figure. No matter how hard they try to put him on teams like the Justice League or the Outsiders or any of this, he is not a person who, in their universe, is really considered a hero most of the time. And Dick Grayson made him a public face. Dick Grayson made you not afraid of Batman unless you had to be. I very much wish that at the end of Final Crisis, Bruce had just stayed dead. But like every comic death, it had no weight. There's been one death in comics I consider to have actual weight. That's Captain Marvel.
Uncle Ben.
Scarlet Spiders.
No. Yeah, I was gonna say Uncle Ben.
I give you that one.
Well, yeah, because that was the long-standing statement. There was two people in comics that would never come back to life: Uncle Ben and Bucky. And they brought back
knocking off the Red Hood.
What about what's her face? Not Mary Jane. I can't remember.
Gwen Stacy.
When Stacy was a clone.
And yes, it was a big marketing ploy, and it's partly why the comic book death is so, like you said, cliched now, because it was so successful. But it was, at the time, a very eye-catching moment when, they announced, because there are times when, Superman's supposed to die in a comic, but for it to be announced that he is going to die, that was a big deal. I think the only other one that was as prolific, that ended up, of course, not sticking was Captain America, because they didn't say that was what was going to happen. It just happened. And so in this day and age of, big promo events and all that stuff, for that to just kind of, then it felt more real, like, oh snap, they really killed him. Like, they didn't make a big deal of it. They didn't have like variant covers. He just died. And you're like, oh my.
Made the news.
Well, for me, and there's probably a few people who remember this. When Jason Todd died, we got to vote.
Yes, yes.
The comic before it had an insert, and all the fans voted whether Jason Todd lived or died. So that's the most prominent one to me, because I got to vote. And yes, I said kill him. Let's kill somebody for a change. I was 10. Let's kill him.
So sweet.
You had a lady with her hand up for a while, so we'll hear it.
I mean, one thing I would like to add is that Black Canary, or at least the current one, is the original Black Canary's daughter, because the original Black Canary did die. But they implanted her memories into the daughter, which is kind of how she lived on. So they do tend to find ways, even if the characters die, to let them live on.
Superior Spider-Man.
Right.
Has propaganda in any form, military, drug abuse, or social conflict, evolved comics?
Well, a lot of it started out that way.
It's
Captain America
been
punching Adolf Hitler in the face.
Superman did too.
I mean, it's been interesting to see how comics started off. There was only like, what, 3 characters that have survived, you know, like from the get-go, like what we consider the beginning of comics. You got Superman, you got Wonder Woman, and Batman, which are all DC. But you've also got Captain America, which, you know, died off, and then they brought him back. But from that time period, you know, it's like you had comics that were selling war bonds against the Japanese, you know, when we were fighting them. In regards to like drug use, I highly recommend this book if no one's read it. It's Batman Venom.
Great.
Yeah, it's a great story. If anybody knows Christy Blanch, she has an online teaching seminar called Super MOOC. She's Mark Wade's girlfriend. She's doing an online thing right now. It's free. This was one of the books. Basically, Batman has a little girl dies as he's trying to save her, and it's because he's too weak. And so he goes to somebody, and they give him venom, which is from Bane's venom, and he becomes a user of that drug to, you know, try to, you know, better himself. But
it's like steroid abuse.
Right. Yeah, and in the end, it just, you know, tears him apart, you know, and it's a fantastic story. It's from the Legends of the Dark Knight, I believe. But I mean, it's interesting to see how characters have come from, you know, we're using them as propaganda to sell and market things like this, and now we're at the point to where it's marketing movies, things that aren't as important, it seems. But still, you know, we've kind of got to that stage, you know, over time, and especially with like the drug use stuff. You know, a lot of that stuff was in the '70s, and
it's making its come.
You know,
it is.
So,
but the really well-told stories will always rise to the top. They'll always rise to the top.
The X-Men has been like the benchmark in a lot of social commentary statements for any sense of discriminatory standings. You had the legacy virus that when it was first introduced could only affect mutants, but then it was found to affect humans, much in the same way that AIDS was only thought to affect the homosexual community, but then heteros started getting there, like, oh wait, this gets everybody. So like the way that the X-Men have been used as a pseudo, I wouldn't say, well, I guess I would kind of say that as propagandists, because the X-Men are the good guys who are so always open for you know, other people's indoctrinations or anything of the sort, has been, you know, phenomenal. If you guys, if any of you want to see any sort of really challenging sort of books, especially in the 80s, once they introduced Kitty Pryde, Kitty was a very excellent source of someone who like toted a lot of different lines, and it was really, really powerful just because it was so bold. And I fell in love with Kitty for her retort of such a thing, because I was like, that's awesome. Like somebody like Kitty has never been, you know, seen to have that kind of gusto, but she did in that moment. It was fantastic.
And also in the 80s when they allowed a Russian onto the team. I mean, the Cold War, I mean, I know a lot of people in here are very young, but we were terrified. And the older generation can speak to this. We were terrified of dying in a nuclear blast. The next day we woke up, and when the X-Men brought a Russian Colossus onto the team, that was huge too. Yeah. They were the enemy.
You had German, you had Russian, you had Japanese, called Irish, Ireland.
We had a Canadian. Whoa.
Oh yeah.
Who was the Canadian?
Are reboots and relaunches of franchises justified?
Yes.
Financially, or do you mean from a
quality?
Yeah, from a quality standpoint.
Green Lantern.
I'll say from a financial standpoint, absolutely. Sometimes you have to roll out
Batman
something fresh
can't
to
stay
people.
30 years old for 60 years.
That can't happen. But from a storytelling standpoint, it's questionable. It's always questionable.
It's got to change with time.
And with the new wave of the movies, like you mentioned, they were also trying to get people like, oh, it's the #1 issue.
Right.
It's the start of the story. Whereas if you walk in there off the street and say, let me read Batman, it's like, well, there's 700 detective comics. They're in on it.
But you know what? I think
that was a little bit.
If they do it too often, then you're going to start looking. Because you can go anywhere, find book #1 in this. And you're like, wait a minute, I got to research this before I even buy it.
Is this a real #1 or is this a Wonder One of 1 of 7?
We are here at the costume contest of Gym City. All these people in red costumes. Oh yeah. Wonder Woman over there. And we got that thing. And we got the devil. And then we got some, yeah, I was going to win a prize, but one of us going to win like a big grand prize. I don't know what it is. So wish me luck. Oh yeah. Gym City coming tonight.
This is a costume you can see coming all the way down the aisle. Tell me about your costumes
And he is a Space Marine from Warhammer. All that stuff that you guys put together, it is all handmade. And tell me about this little gentleman over here. What's your name? That's Steven. And what are you? And he is Master Chief. You guys get to work together and put these things together. That's always nice. Let's give them a round of applause for making it on screen. And take a look at the back of that costume too. Every part of it is pretty awesome.
Dude, I'm gonna buy some stuff. Also, we got some more meetings coming up. Kevin Eastman's at 4 o'clock, so he'll be happy to see me. All right, I'll be back in a moment.
Hey.
All right, Kevin Eastman.
Bodyguard Shane over here, my son. He was born right in the middle of Comic-Con in 2006, so I know he's mine for sure. So I already twisted it properly. This is the first time we're doing this PowerPoint show, and it's kind of fun because it was, as we, I can't believe I'm up here 30 years after Pete and I created the Turtles, still talking about Turtles, so it's pretty awesome. So I wanted to pick out some of my favorite photos and some of my favorite images and give you a little bit of walk through some of the stuff from the past and talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing in the future. This, of course, is the first cover that Peter and I did in 1984. I don't know if you guys knew that when the Turtles were created, I was a huge fan of comics in general, a huge fan of Frank Miller's Daredevil, Frank Miller's Ronin, of course, blew my mind. And so, much like Dave Sim did when he worked on Cerebus, I don't know if you remember Cerebus, it was a little aardvark kind of drawn like Barry Smith and walked around chopping people up, but then Dave Sim went on to do 300 iconic issues. That was such a fantastic journey, and he's such a comic genius and was a big inspiration to me to self-publish. And so we did the first cover as a sort of a homage to Frank Miller, dedicated the first issue to Frank Miller and Jack Kirby. So, speaking of Jack Kirby, I first met Peter Laird. I actually found this magazine when I was riding on a bus. I lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. I found this magazine on a bus called Scat. It had cartoons in it, and it was in the next town over in Northampton. So I went over to Northampton with my portfolio full of stuff to try to sell my artwork to them. And they really weren't doing the magazine anymore, but they said, you should really meet this guy, Peter Laird. He draws the same, crazy stuff you draw. So they gave me Peter's address. I wrote him a note, and the first time I went to Peter's studio, a little tiny studio apartment in Northampton, Massachusetts, he had this Jack Kirby drawing. Jack Kirby, especially Jack Kirby's Commandy, was one of the biggest influences when I was very young, like about his age. And so I'd never seen a Jack Kirby original, and I literally, I think, wet myself and fell over. And he gave that to me years later, and that was kind of a neat thing. Not long after I met Peter, this is the actual house in Dover, New Hampshire, where we actually created the Turtles. Peter and his wife, Janine, had rented it. She was a teacher, and they had a roommate move out just when I got done cooking lobsters in Maine. I grew up in Maine, so I got done cooking lobsters for the summer. He said, come on down and, you can rent a room and we'll form a little studio. And that's where the name Mirage Studios came from, because it was a mirage. It was just our living room. So this was actually the house. It was sad because one of the Turtles super fans had written me a note, I think about 2 years ago. The place had gone up for sale, and he's like, you should buy it. You should turn it into a turtle museum. And we did, nothing. It was like, a couple months later, it was flattened. So, we have this house. And this is my drawing table. I use the term loosely. It was like I used to had this overstuffed chair that I found at a secondhand store, and I had a lap board that I put on my lap, and that's where the first drawings of the Turtles are created. This is in the living room in Dover, New Hampshire. It's I love the wallpaper. It's awesome. Very inspirational. So as the story goes, late one night in November 1983, Peter used to watch what I called the worst TV shows on television. To me, they were T.J. Hooker and the A-Team and all that classic stuff. So I figured it was my job to annoy him as much as possible while he was watching his favorite shows. So late one night, I did this sketch here, and I said, "This is going to be the next big thing." Ha ha ha. Totally kidding. But I did a sketch. Michelangelo was the first Ninja Turtle ever drawn, and that's the actual sketch that was done in 1983. And it seems like 30 years ago. Oh wait, it is 30 years ago. But that's the first one. But so I did this sketch, and then Pete did a sketch to kind of top my drawing, change some things, and then I penciled this piece. And this piece was, I said, well, if you can have one, why not four? And so I did it in pencil, and I had this comic book title block that said Ninja Turtles on it. And when Pete inked it in, he added Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we were just laughing ourselves silly because we did actually think it was the dumbest thing we'd ever seen and drawn. And because I think it was literally the next day we got up and we looked at this drawing again, as I love to say, we didn't have any distracting painting work going on, so we said, let's just, come up with our idea of how these creatures got to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We'll draw it ourselves, we'll self-publish it. We're not sending it to Marvel or DC or any of those companies, so we'll just self-publish it ourselves, inspired by guys like Dave Sim and Wendy and Richard Pini, who did ElfQuest, and so many underground artists that I was a big fan of back in those days. So, and that was, we started that in 1983 and 1984. May of 1984 is when we released the first book. So it's going to be 30 years this May. A lot of people ask where the names came from for the turtles. When Pete and I started working on ideas for how to put the story together and what we're going to name them, traditional Asian names seemed to be perfect fit at first, but we said, this concept's so stupid, we got to come up with something funnier. And we said, well, how about, Doug, Steve, Bob, and I said, no, we have to go much, much farther, we have to go crazy. And I was, growing up, I was a huge art history fan in general. And this painting was done in 1980 when I graduated high school. This is my tribute to Leonardo da Vinci, and it's still on the wall at my high school up in Westbrook, Maine. And so I said, why not name him after Renaissance artists? And so Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael came first. And it was my choice for a sculptor for what became Donatello was Bernini. I thought Bernini was a much better sculptor. And he said, well, how about if we find another name with an O, and it was Donatello, and it just seemed to fit. So the roots to the names of the turtles go way back to when I was reading comics in high school and trying not to get in trouble. Before we did the first issue, this was kind of funny. I just put this in because it's we rolled out the concept trying to get ourselves as much recognition because we were quite positive we were not going to sell one single copy of this book. But we put together this press kit, and we sent it out to all the local newspapers, and we ended up getting a lot of publicity, a lot of local publicity. But it was funny, just seeing that. I found it recently going through some stuff, and it was the official press release. This was also in the press release, which was, it was the first ad that we put, to send out, because we spent all the money on the comic books. I had $500 I'd gotten back for an income tax return. Pete had $200 in the bank. We cleared up his bank account. And then I borrowed $1,000 from an uncle, and we actually had enough money to print 3,000 copies. And we had enough money left over to run one ad in the Comics Buyer's Guide, and that's an example of the ad. Again, it's so funny to see, especially this one. We call this the official premiere of the Turtles. I think the book was printed in April of 1984, and May 5th, 1984 was this tiny little comic convention in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and that's where the book actually premiered. What's really cool is that I haven't done a signing with Pete just for different reasons. He doesn't travel anywhere, and I live in the West Coast, and I'm doing a lot more traveling this year. But this May 3rd, Free Comic Book Day, Peter and I are doing a reunion signing up in Dover. Actually, he owns a store in Rochester. It's called Jetpack Comics, so it's kind of neat to sit there with Peter 30 years later and 50 pounds heavier, but it's neat to do it. And of course, that's the cover again for the first issue. A lot of people ask, actually, what was cool is there's only 3,000 of these done, and I rarely get to see first printings. And actually, a gentleman was here at the show that actually had a first printing, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. It's kind of cool. It brings back some nice memories. And a lot of people ask, how do you tell the difference between first printing, second printing, and third printing? A lot of them have, on the inside front cover, we put second printing and third printing. But this was an original ad for Gobbledygook, which was before Peter and I did the first issue of the Turtles, we put together a collection of our short stories, photocopied them, stapled them together, and I think we only did 50 copies of each. Gave about 10 away, and then couldn't get anybody to buy them, so we stuck them in the closet. But that's how you tell. That ad was changed to a T-shirt ad for the second and third prints and stuff. That's kind of cool to see that. I was looking for some other photos of this one set. When we got the books printed in Dover, New Hampshire, we literally went there and Pete's Vega, he had a Vega station wagon, which you had to push up the hill, the thing was just terrible. But we went to the printer, made multiple trips, and these were the actual copies of the first printing sitting on the corner of our studio. We made some of the boxes of books into a coffee table, we made some of them into end tables, and we stacked them in the corner. Again, not thinking we'd sell any copies of them. But we ended up selling out of the pizza these days. But that's actually a picture of us at the Portsmouth Comic Con. I think for a while there, I was too afraid to shave my mustache off. I didn't think it'd grow back. But funny to see that. This was actually the other studio in Sharon, Connecticut. We started working on the second book.
Oh, dance contest, that's right. Oh, we got dance contest.
We got this.
Hey, can I join you? All right. Hey, I'm gonna dance with you.
Do the Harlem Shake.
All right.
All right, ready? 1, 2.
Do you want me in the picture?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I want to make sure.
1, 2, 3.
All right. Cool. Awesome.
Achievement unlocked. Bring tears to Chris's eyes. It's been a pleasure, doing this for you guys. I hope that it stick around, and I hope that 15 years down the road, this will still be here. I hope it becomes bigger. And as I've told you, and I'll tell you because you're new to this, if you guys treat this organization good things will happen. I mean, we've in 2 semesters, we've managed to get panels at Gym City. We've got connections. I'm moving on to bigger and better things, and you guys will always be in my heart. And I can't thank you guys enough, for just your patronage to this organization. And I look forward to seeing you guys all again in the future. I'll always be around to help out when it's necessary. But I have faith in my new crew of people that are taking over these positions, and I know that they will make the best of this organization in the future. So. Yeah, without further ado, Doc, am I relieved?
You're relieved.
Wait, stay there for just a second. You're not relieved.
You're not yet. Never mind, take it back. I was wrong.
Smile. It's your first action of president. You're wrong.
Okay, now you can be relieved.
All right, Doc.
Looks like you've already been usurped by Jake.
So,
ladies and gentlemen, Chris Gass.
All right. Chris.
One more year.
One more year.
Mine's bigger than yours.
It's not the size, it's how you use it. I've had that prepared for just such a difference.
Good, great.
Wow, so that's kind of a hard thing to follow. Want to do an auction?
Yeah.